Okay, folks, we're almost there. This is chapter 11 of Lord of the Flies. All right, folks, did you notice the hesitation? I said, this is chapter 11 of, and I had to think for a moment what novel it was, because I've been going back and forth between doing video reviews for you guys, for Lord of the Flies, but then I've also been doing my grade 11's 1984, and it just so happens over the last couple of days I've been doing just 1984. So I almost said this is chapter 11 of 1984, but I hesitated, thought about it first, and it didn't happen. So there you go. Also, I'm wearing a shirt for the Umbrella Academy, which is a comic book that was turned into a Netflix show for season 1 and confirmed season 2. And I'm obsessed with the show, and so I thought I would represent with the t-shirt. What else? I think that's really it. You know what? We're almost at the end, so why not just get right into it? All right. So for chapters 11 and 12, there's still below the surface information. Sorry, but that's what you get with these classics. That's what you get with novels of this caliber. You just get a non-stop. Come on, really? A message that doesn't really pertain to me. That's what you get sometimes in group texts. You get messages that don't pertain to you sometimes. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So yeah, but that's what you get with the classics. Sometimes it's just non-stop below the surface information, like Lord of the Flies is, and you got to keep up. You got to keep up to the best of your ability. But that's what I'm here for. I'm here to show you. So if you didn't figure it out for yourself, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm me and you're you. Right? Right. So let's do it. What do my notes say? Well, let's talk about where we left off in chapter 10, which is a very nasty Jack stealing Piggy's glasses. That's not nice. Ruins their shelters, and and Jack leaves with Piggy's glasses. So chapter 11 actually picks up from the following morning, where there are 4 boys left in Ralph's tribe, which is Ralph and Piggy and Sam and Eric. And it's nice to think that the twins have stuck it out with Ralph all the way to the end. That's really nice. So the 4 boys are left, and as you can imagine, Piggy is not impressed with what happened the night before. And so his glasses are taken from him, not just borrowed this time to start a fire, but actually stolen from him. And so Piggy actually, he kind of orders Ralph to call an assembly, which Ralph thinks is kind of silly because it's just the 4 of them. But Piggy wants an assembly anyway so that they can decide, the 4 of them, what to do, right? What are their next steps? So one of the slides that I think you'll see here is just the insignificance of the shell. And we should have seen this from chapters ago. We shouldn't be surprised that the shell really has no meaning. And I guess for the first little bit of below the surface information that I guess we get in this chapter is just the the way that the shell is actually described. And remember when Ralph and Piggy first found the conch, it was creamy in color, a very vibrant pink, and now it is it's described as, actually, as the chapters have gone on and it's lost color, it's almost transparent. It's white and transparent, and so as it's lost its color, it's also lost its meaning and its significance. And so again, not an accident, those two things paired together. Good. When they do assemble, the four boys, when they do assemble, Ralph's recap here of the events that have taken place sound, or at least should sound, oddly familiar to you. So I'll just recap it here. As it says on the PowerPoint, this is from Ralph. Ralph says, just an ordinary fire. You'd think that we could do that, wouldn't you? Just a smoke signal so we can be rescued. Are we savages or what? Only now there's no signal going up. Ships may be passing. Do you remember how Jack went hunting and the fire went out and a ship passed by? And they all think that he's best as chief? Then there was, he remembers Simon's death. And he says, that's Jack's fault too. So down in bold here, I have kind of summarized Ralph's own recap. And again, the point that Ralph is making, I'll read it to you. The point that Ralph is making, aside from everything just being Jack's fault, is that the boys couldn't even follow a simple rule. There's a simple rule put in place. Many simple rules actually put in place that the boys have a really difficult time following. And if they were just to follow this simple rule, they would be able to be saved, right? The simple rule that I'm talking about in this case is just keeping a fire going. All you have to do is keep a fire going and we will eventually be saved, right? We will be rescued. A passing ship or a passing plane will eventually see it and we can leave. But in order for that to happen, not only do they have to follow the simple rule, but they have to remain civilized. And of course, because they're unable to follow the simple rule, right, then they are not saved, right? This idea of, they'll never be saved. In fact, Ralph actually says this to Jack's tribe in this chapter. He says, we need a fire going if we ever have plans to leave, if we're ever going to get out of here, which the boys don't care about. We'll talk about that when we get there. So this idea, I guess what I'm getting at is this idea of follow a simple rule in order to be saved and remain civil. And if you can't follow a simple rule, then you won't be saved, and you sort of you spiral into uncivil behavior, which is exactly what has happened to them. And so anytime that I pose this to my class, I say, look at the terminology. What does that sound like? And what it should remind you of is the story of Adam and Eve. This idea of follow a simple rule, right? And you have eternal life and paradise, right? But you can't follow a simple rule and you spiral into uncivil behavior, which of course we refer to as sin. So those two things kind of interestingly enough being paired together as well. So I did want to make sure that we talked about that. Good. Page 189 to 190, Piggy explains during this assembly as well, because actually it's kind of interesting that Piggy kind of says to Ralph, this is just talk, and we're not getting to really what's important. And what Piggy, of course, wants to talk about is how they're going to go about getting his glasses back. And Piggy is the one that says, when we get there, when we get to Castle Rock, I'm not going to ask for my glasses back, as if Jack is going to do me some favor. He says, I'm going to demand them back. He says, I'm going to tell Jack, what the right thing is to do, and the right thing to do is to give me my glasses back. Right at the beginning of chapter 11, they talk about Piggy's myopia, which is nearsightedness, and we know that Piggy really can't see without them. So for him to, even remain alive in this novel, he's going to need his glasses for sure. And so he says, I'm going to go there and I'm going to tell him that it's the right thing to do. So before going to Castle Rock, and this is another really important thing to talk about because specifically it connects to something that I spoke about in Chapter 7, which is the idea of hygiene, is before going to Castle Rock, Sam and Eric, they kind of keep fighting, not actually fighting, but kind of disagreeing with Ralph on this point, because Sam and Eric, they want to camouflage themselves. They want to paint themselves just like Jack is going to be, and just like his tribe is going to be painted. And Sam and Eric want to meet Jack and his tribe on their level. If they're going to be painted, we should be painted too, and kind of match their ferocity. And it takes Ralph yelling at them and saying, "No paint. We're not going to paint ourselves, right? We're not going to camouflage ourselves." And again, the connection to hygiene, as we spoke about back in chapter 7, is the idea that the more hygienic you are, the more connected to civilization you are, and therefore the more civil you will act. And so for Ralph, Ralph's suggestion is, not only are we not going to paint ourselves, but we should look as clean as possible, right? We should even kind of tie our long hair back so it looks like we're kind of fresh. And I guess the hope for Ralph is, if we can go there looking civil, maybe we can somehow expect a civil conversation to take place. So that's kind of Ralph's hope. Now, if you've read the chapter, of course, that's not what happens, but I'll talk about that when we get there. When they finally do get to Castle Rock, of course, Piggy has to be led there, so he can't really see all that well. In fact, if you're really paying attention to how Piggy's able to keep his footing, as Sam and Eric are trailing their spears behind them, it's making a line in the sand, and Piggy's able to just stay in between those two lines that Sam and Eric are making with their spears, and so he can make sure that he's staying in a straight line. And so that's how he's able to kind of get there. When they finally do get to Castle Rock and start kind of making their way up to it, is eventually Piggy just has to kind of grip onto a rock so as to not lose his footing and fall. Whereas Sam, Eric, and Ralph are, of course, okay because they can see properly. They're met, obviously, with Jack's tribe, who stopped them, very similar to how Roger was stopped in Chapter 10 by his own tribe, where they say, "Halt, who goes there?" And Roger says, "You can see who I am, don't be silly." And very similar do they do this to Ralph and his tribe here, where they say, "Halt, who goes there?" And they stop Ralph and Sam and Eric and Piggy from actually entering into Castle Rock. At the bottom of page 194, and I bring this up to show you that I'm not a crazy person when I bring some of these things to your attention. Way back in chapter 4, we talked about Roger throwing the stones at Henry, and that he doesn't hit him on purpose, he aims to miss, and about how that rush of adrenaline that Roger gets, it's really caused by this urge to hurt somebody. And so we shouldn't be surprised here that on the bottom of page 194, Roger is back at it, throwing stones at Sam and Eric, still aiming to miss, so that's good, but throwing stones down onto Sam and Eric. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Jack finally appears, and after some argument that takes place, of course, between Jack and Ralph, they start wrestling with each other, and they start kind of hitting each other with their spears and trying to stab at each other and so on. And in one of their breaks from their wrestling, is Ralph really tries his best to explain to the entire group, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, how important the fire really is. That if they have any plans of going home, they need to keep a fire going. Ralph even points at their fire that they have going, and he says that's a cooking fire. It's not effective enough to signal a passing ship or a passing plane. So again, really important to mention, especially as we get into chapter 12, and we'll talk about that when we get there. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, when Ralph talks about the importance of a fire, surprise, surprise, nobody really cares. And in order to distract his tribe from Ralph talking about the fire, is Jack orders for his tribe to tie up Sam and Eric, which they do. That brings us to the bottom of page 199, where Roger begins throwing the stones at Piggy. And so Piggy takes it upon himself to speak now. Nothing is being accomplished through Ralph wrestling with Jack and arguing with Jack, so Piggy takes it upon himself to speak. And it's interesting, again, if you pay attention to the diction, when Roger is throwing the stones down onto Piggy, there's no indication that he's aiming to miss. So we can maybe safely assume here that Roger is throwing with intent to hit Piggy. And, page 200, so awkward. So awkward. And get ready, because I'm going to use the real word. It's in the literature, so I'm going to use the real word. So, earmuffs, if you don't want to hear it. But I have to use the real language, and the reason why is not just for shock value, which is really not the point, but the fact that it's in the literature. So it's necessary. It's necessary to hear, and it should be uncomfortable. It should be uncomfortable to hear. If you hear, and of course the word that I'm referring to is the N-word. If you hear it and you're not made uncomfortable by it, you're weird. You're a weird person. So you should feel awkward at hearing it. And so the part that I'm obviously talking about is when Piggy starts to speak. What Piggy is trying to say is, what's better? To act the way that you're acting, or to act the way that we're acting? And of course, Piggy's referring to himself and Ralph and Sam and Eric. What's better? Right? What you're doing isn't accomplishing anything. You know, at least our end goal is to get out of here. And so it just so happens that Piggy is so racist. And he asks if it's better to be painted niggers or to be sensible. Oh, so racist. And obviously what Piggy is really saying here, is it better to be black and savage or to be white and sensible? That's really what he's asking. And so essentially what he's pairing up is, you are acting like a bunch of black people, right? Acting animalistic, which is, can't stress this enough, so racist. But given the time period, it doesn't obviously make it right. But maybe it's an indication of how Piggy was raised. So again, not doesn't make it okay, but kind of the norm, I guess you could say, of society. Good. Thankfully, what I like though is that soon after, Ralph rephrases the question, which is really, really nice. And Ralph asks, well, what's better, to have rules or to hunt? Again, same sort of thing. To have rules like we do, or to hunt like you are, what's better? So Ralph actually takes a rather awkward situation and makes it at least a little bit better. A little bit better. Of all people, so you don't think I'm a crazy person, of all people, that big boulder that has been teetering on the edge, that chapters ago Jack said, if anybody tries to get in, we can just send the boulder down, and we can, we'll have protection in Castle Rock and so on. And of course, back then, Ralph did not want to make Castle Rock their home. And so that teetering boulder that has been on the edge, Roger, of all characters, sends it down Castle Rock, and it goes bounding down. Of course, Ralph, with his vision, is able to get out of the way. Piggy, unfortunately, is not. Fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, he is racist. So we probably don't feel so bad, for what happens to him. Oh, that's such a horrible thing to say. Piggy is hit with this massive boulder. So before we talk about Piggy's death, again with Roger and the rock throwing, and I think I do have a PowerPoint on it. I think, yeah. Oh, this one, yes. The action and the thought process that goes along with it. Again, I'm not a crazy person. Okay? Roger is kind of known since chapter 4 of being this boy who throws stones, throws rocks, and he throws this rock or this boulder. He sends it down, and it hits Piggy. And it says, the rock struck Piggy a glancing blow from chin to knee, and the conch exploded into 1,000 white fragments and ceased to exist. And so, again, another piece of below the surface information. Piggy dying, and the conch exploding and ceasing to exist. Both Piggy being killed and the conch being destroyed at the exact same time. So fitting, because we know that all along Piggy has really clung to the conch as his way of kind of evening the playing field. That as long as he's holding it, he has a right to speak, and no one should be able to tell him that he can't. And so the fact that Piggy dies at the same time that this shell is supposed to represent order, as I introduced to you in chapter 2, it's really no more. So you lose Piggy's intellect. You kind of lose what he stands for in terms of order. And so too with the destruction of the shell. It's really fitting that Piggy dying and the shell breaking happen at the same time. Very fitting. And Jack says to Ralph, "That's what you get." You know, and that's Jack's way of saying, if you mess with my tribe, that's going to happen to you too. And, you know, I never do a good job of explaining this part and kind of what's going through Ralph's mind. But it's almost like Ralph realizes these boys are capable of murder. Now, the reason why I don't do a good job of explaining this is because Ralph knew that they were capable of murder when they killed Simon in chapter 9. But at least with the killing of Simon, you could blame it on the fact that it was dark, the fact that the boys were scared, the fact that they may have mistook Simon for the beast, the fact that they were chanting and got too wrapped up in it. But now we're talking about, what, midday? The boys aren't doing the chant. Therefore, it's not dark. Therefore, the boys aren't scared. There's nothing to blame it on this time. The boys in a, normal frame of mind are able to commit murder. And Ralph realizes now with Piggy killed, Sam and Eric being, taken prisoner essentially, Ralph is on his own. And somebody ends up kind of throwing a spear at Ralph and injuring him a little bit, and he realizes that his death is coming. If he sticks around any longer, he will be killed. These boys will kill him. And so Ralph has no other option but to run. And that's exactly what he does. He leaves Castle Rock, and he just takes off. And that's where we'll pick up from in chapter 12, which is essentially Ralph spending the majority of that chapter running from these boys that are hunting after him. So, like I said, Sam and Eric are taken as, they're kind of tortured and forced to join Jack's tribe. They don't really have much of a choice. And Ralph simply just runs. At that point, Jack actually orders for his boys not to chase after Ralph and to head back to Castle Rock, so not to chase after him. But they certainly will in chapter 12. But for now, they are not going to. And that really wraps up chapter 11. So a few below the surface pieces of information there, and another death with Piggy. We also find out Piggy's racist, which is so not cool. And we see the culmination of Roger and his rock throwing, and just Ralph's panic flight away from Jack's tribe. So I hope that was nice and clear and concise. And as I always say, if you have questions, you know where to find me. Until next time.